Hi, everyone. So, today I wanted to talk about a tale of two images. Specifically, two images that I've taken of the same object about a year apart, almost exactly a year apart. So that I can kind of go through some things I noticed as I was going through that show kind of a little bit of my journey as I've gone through here, but also some things that I think will be helpful for you all when you're trying to keep in mind different things for your own images. So first of all, I can't emphasize enough how valuable it can be to go back to a target year after year. Not just because it's a target that you may like, but because you've improved or your gear is improved or for whatever reason, you may take a much better picture this time. So, what we're looking at today is two images that I took of M78, or the nebula that doesn't appear to have an actual name. So, a lot of times I'll call it the Eyes Nebula or the Private Eyes Nebula because they're kind of hiding behind the dust there. But I love this target. It's a great dark sky target because it's a reflection nebula primarily, but it's got all this kind of dark dust lining through it and all of that, and it's really really cool. And this particular image I took on my first trip out to the dark site after I picked the hobby back up. That I took around, I think it was December 27th of 2018, was that particular trip. And it was one of my favorite images once I was done processing it. I was super proud of it. And it was one of my favorite images for the whole year last year. And I think, shown it before in one of my previous images. But when I went back out on the 30th of December 2019, so just a few weeks ago, back out to the dark site, I decided to take shots of this particular target again. And once again, it's just one of my favorites, and I felt like I'd learned a lot. So I was hopeful that the image would turn out better than what I had before. And what I ended up with was this image. And in my opinion, leaps and bounds, it's a much, much better image in terms of overall quality. That's not to say that my old image was bad. I just feel like I got more of what I would really want to get out at the current level that I'm at. And so I wanted to talk about why this image versus this image are so different, and how much of that has to do with what I've learned versus the gear that I'm using now, and things like that, and try to put that on a little bit more of an apples to apples comparison so that when you're making your decisions on should I buy a new piece of gear or should I focus more on certain skills in my processing or a piece of processing software, maybe this will help you, figure out, how to best make some of those decisions. But also at the same point in time, I hope that this will show to you why coming back to a target one year after another can really make a big difference, right? I didn't, add. It's not like I took the exposures from last year and combined them into this one. This is an all new set of exposures, same target, but just what that year can make for you as a difference. So diving into the raw images themselves, I pulled them both up in PixInsight here. I'm not going to do any processing in this video. I'm just using this to kind of interrogate the images a little bit as we look at them. On the surface, especially zoomed down, there really isn't a whole lot of difference here. There's obviously some color differences, but some of that can be kind of chalked up to personal preference in color calibration and that kind of thing. They both look really good. If what you're doing is shooting to put stuff out on Instagram or Facebook, you might be done with that first image. Or not done. You never take it again. But I mean, that may be as good as you really want to get. But really, when we interrogate in further, we start seeing really some of the big differences in here. And so once again, maybe kind of hard to tell at the YouTube level, but I'll take it in even further here and you start to see just the difference in the amount of speckling and color noise and kind of these almost like cell-like artifacts that are in here versus the ones that are in here. There certainly are ones in here, but they're not exactly the same. One of the things that I think is really funny is that these two images, the one on the 2018 one was taken with a one-shot color camera, and 2019 was taken with a monochrome camera. Both ZWO cameras, but slightly different sensors, that kind of thing. And as you can tell, I think I've got better color in the 2019 image than I did even in the 2018, even though this was a color camera. And I'll get into why that is right here. But one of the ways that you can tell that is looking at these stars right here. So you look at this star, you look at that star, they look pretty star-like. You come over here, and I can see some color fringing, some blue color fringing down here, a little bit of red color fringing right around the top here. And granted, this is extreme pixel peeping here, but it does add up to a certain extent over your image, right? So I find it really interesting that my colors aren't as well matched, at that pinpoint level in the one-shot color camera as they were over here in the monochrome. So why was that? Well, I think the main difference there is that I've got a better scope now than I did before. So I went from, they're still approximately the same field of view. These are both f5 configurations for these scopes, but I went from an Explore Scientific ED refractor that was 102 millimeters to my Takahashi FSQ that's 106 millimeters. So about the same aperture too, but that FSQ is just superior glass. And it's specifically superior in bringing those different colors together at the right point versus what you might get in the Explore Scientific. And granted, this is not Explore Scientific's most high-end glass. This is kind of their, I wouldn't say entry level, but it is their first level on their, for that size on the ED refractor. So, still, that's not bad. I mean, you bring it out like this and you can't even really tell, right? But it is some things like that. So that's I think the biggest impact on the scope itself, right? Is that level of detail. You can see in here some, even though I'm very zoomed in, it just seems sharper, right? On some of this, and I chalk a lot of that up to two things. One, the scope itself I think makes the biggest difference, and then two, I've tweaked my mount a little bit. I've gotten better with guiding. I think my stars are a little bit less bloated, a little bit more round than they would have been otherwise in the older image, that kind of thing. And then the last part on that is I was not using any kind of filter in front of this. It was my dark sky trip. Why put a filter in front? Well, if you, even using a one-shot camera, if you're in a dark sky location, you might still want to put just a UV IR blocking filter on it. That blocking that infrared can help with star bloating, where when you have your bigger stars, and it may be a little bit easier to see on the full out one, some of these bigger stars here I think are bloating out a little bit more than they are on this one down here. And a big part of that is likely due to that UV-IR blocking filter. Then the last bit on the camera, some of that sharpness that you're getting in this one versus this one is also likely due to just the resolution differences. When you use a color camera, you're only using a certain amount of each pixel to make up, or a certain amount of the pixels to make up your detail for each color channel, right? There's this pixel has a red filter in front, this pixel has a blue filter in front, green, etc. Versus on the black and white camera, when you are just taking the detail layer, the luminance layer, all the pixels are getting it. So you do get a little bit sharper images just off the bat from that. But that still doesn't really account for the bulk of what's going on in the differences here. So I wouldn't say the camera and the telescope make the difference by any means. I think what really is going to make the difference is looking at some of the raw integrated pieces. So this is just the stacked files that have come out. This is before doing any kind of cropping or anything else. I like to keep at least my original stacks if I ever want to go back and reinterrogate these. And once again, at this level on YouTube, you might not be able to see much of a difference. But let's zoom it in to the 2-to-1 level, really getting in there. And then we go to the 2-to-1 level here, and it should be pretty apparent the difference in noise between these two. This one is much less noisier than this one is. And, coming out like a level or two here, you can just see what impact that has on things like this little fine filament here that is a lot easier to see over here. And you take that out to the whole image level, and it just adds up. When you're getting into especially these low signal areas here, there's a lot more just speckly noise, a lot harder to make out the finer details there. And so why is that? Is that the camera? Is this camera just so much better? No, not really. I mean, they're both, this is the ASI 294 color camera, and this is the ASI 1600 color camera, or not color, black and white camera. Both kind of really good sensors, in my opinion, from ZWO. I've seen a lot of people taking great images with the 294. As far as I know, it's not inherently any noisier. There just isn't a black and white version of this camera. That's why I went for the 1600 at the time there when I went for my monochrome. But I'll show you what really I think makes a difference. And part of it is this is my first dark sky trip, so I wanted to take a lot of targets, so I didn't spend a lot of time on it. So I did a quick, look at how much time I actually spent on the data acquisition here. So for 2018, I took 22 color frames. In 2019, I'm just looking at the luminance here because we're comparing apples to apples in the black and white luminance side. Right, I took 20 luminance frames. Now I actually had interspersed with that a red frame, a green frame, a blue frame. So I had 10 of each of those. And that's what adds up to the color data, which I'll get to in a moment here. But just talking about the detail, just the black and white detail area of it, about the same number of frames. So what's the difference? Well, my exposure time is very different between the two. I did 2-minute long exposures back in 2018. And I did 5-minute long exposures in 2019. And that drastically changes the math all the way down. So same number of files, so same amount of math going on, or roughly same number of files, same amount of averaging out of the noise. But that longer exposure, added up to almost an hour-long difference in terms of how much time I imaged this one target. So I'm not saying that you need long exposures in order to have good quality, but your total exposure time is really important. So in 2018, I got a little under, an hour. I got about 3/4 of an hour worth of time on this target, mainly because I shot 5 targets that night. I just was so happy to be under dark skies that, and I was seeing data coming back in, that I just set up all sorts of targets. I shot the Horsehead, Orion, a couple of galaxies, etc., all in one night, and just hopped from target to target. So I had, a little under an hour to almost 2 hours on just the data side. And, just once again, bringing that in, the 1-to-1 level on both, you can see how much difference, particularly in like an area like this that has some stark contrast, how much difference it made, this area here versus that area there, right? So it's really that exposure time, I think, that made the biggest difference. So even if I put this to 2-minute exposures, yes, apples to apples, it still would probably be a little bit noisier with 2-minute exposures versus 5-minute exposures. But if I was doing the same total integration time at 2-minute exposures, I think I would still see a similar jump in that loss of noise, the increase in that signal to noise ratio between these here. So that I consider to be, kind of critical importance here on the detail side. Now on the color side, like I said, I was still doing 5-minute exposures. I only had 10 images of red, green, and blue. So technically, if you're thinking about it in terms of a color camera has, all of those coming in on each shot, I had 20 red, 20 green, 20 blue at 2 minutes versus 10 for red, green, and blue individually at 5 minutes. So they're actually a lot closer there than you might think, on the color side. But I still feel like my color came out better in here, and that I think really comes down to the processing for both of these. And I'm not going to go down to each step of processing here, more than to just say I've learned a ton in the past year. I've done a lot of videos on different things that I've been learning. I've signed up on different courses I could take, and I've learned a lot from other members of my local astrophotography group. And I think that learning, more than anything else, is what really helped me down the road here. The biggest things are things like the color calibration on this, the background extraction. What am I considering background? When looking at this image, it's easy to think, oh, everything in here that's not this kind of brownish color is just flat black sky background. But when we look at that same image here, you can see how much of this is actually hydrogen data, right? So it's actually more of that deep red with, the background not really being fully black, right? So that difference of understanding what is in the area is important as well on helping that color calibration. And then the last part of it is just noise reduction skills, right? I spent a lot of time trying to deep dive specifically into how do I get a less noisy background, right? And zooming in on this, I think you can tell I've made some pretty good improvements on that, especially on the color noise side. I'm not even sure I did any color noise reduction in this particular image, and it makes a big difference both when you're pixel peeping, but also on that final product of making it look like one smooth picture versus kind of almost like a pointillism art piece, right? And so that was important as well. And what I'm getting at with kind of going through all that on what the difference is I really attribute most of this to me having more experience on both the acquisition side and on the processing side versus just better equipment. Yes, I have better equipment than I did a year ago, and I really like the equipment I have, but I think that accounts for much less of the jump in quality than just taking the time on the experience and learning how to acquire this stuff better. And to kind of illustrate why I think that's really important for you all is a lot of times when I'm picking a target, sometimes I will go and make what I think is kind of a mistake, and I'll go do a quick Google search on the target, just to get an idea of what's out there and what's possible. So for M78, the first two images that come up in Google are this one and this one. And sweet Jeebus, I don't think I'll ever get to that level on these targets. Maybe this one, because it's a little bit more wide field, but like all this color depth, all this hydrogen data, I got to assume this was combining hydrogen alpha filtered data with everything else. But just looking at it and even inspecting in more deeply there, the noise level is non-existent. There must have been a tremendous amount of time and skill put into acquiring and processing that. And then this one, it says right here, using the wide field imager camera on the 2.2 meter telescope in Chile. Okay, yeah, maybe I don't hold myself to that standard, right? But this is in some ways I think a mistake, right? You see an image like this and you go, oh, I want to make that image. I'm not going to be able to make that image. I got to level with myself on that. I'm not going to be able to get there. But I can get here, and here isn't bad right now. I feel like for me, I've got a lot of the detail that I wanted to get. I'm starting to really get that color out. I probably could, if I was doing it again, I might spend the whole night on this target or more than one night and get more and more of that color data, because I love like the blues that are in here and that kind of thing. But I don't want to hold myself to this standard. What I want to do, and what I encourage you to do, is hold yourself to this standard. Not saying this image, but whatever this is for you. So for me, when I was going out for this year, I was saying I want to beat this image that I took previously. I'm holding myself to myself as my competition, right? When I go out, I want the next shot to be better than the last shot. And that's not always attainable, but that's the bar that I'm shooting for. So as long as I can keep improving in the hobby, then, one, not only do I feel like I've accomplished something, but two, there's something new there, right? Yeah, I took that picture. It's in my library. I can say I have shot M78 before, but I didn't shoot it like this, right? And I'm excited for next year because there's already things that I can tell that I can do better on. So looking back here at this, let me blow the actual image up here and get rid of these other guys. And on this image right here, I can tell you that there's a lot that I can do better. So, first of all, it's hard to, I hope it's hard to tell in this final image. But look at this one over here. You see this bright, what you would normally think of as a gradient here? When I really get in and inspect that, it's not a gradient. As a matter of fact, it almost, when I first saw it, it looked like amp glow. Here, it looked like amp glow, especially on these CMOS cameras. Sometimes you get these starburst patterns coming out from the side that's referred to as amp glow. And the trick to deal with that is you do good calibration frames, good dark frames, good flat frames, and that stuff basically disappears. But for some reason, it didn't on this one. I had another image that same night for the same exposure time with the same camera that wasn't having this, and it was driving me nuts. And then I looked at a star chart and talked with some friends and figured out, okay, if on the scale of this, if you consider this a foot diagonal in lengthwise, then the equivalent of about another 7 or 8 inches diagonally this way is the star Alnitak, as well as one or two other bright stars kind of in that same diagonal range. And I started seeing online that, this is F5. There's also like an F3 version of the scope or whatnot. Depending on where some of those bright stars are falling, it might be just enough to shoot a reflection, or a flare into your scope. And the only real solution to that is maybe frame it a little bit more one way or a little bit more the other way, and then this isn't going to be coming through. And man, this was killing me, because it is this, it doesn't seem that bad, but it is a bright corner of this that's starting to eat into a lot of this darker dust area that I was really hoping to get some more detail in. On the final image, I was able to use the dynamic background extraction process to get rid of most of it. I can still see some of the lines here. So that is definitely something I've learned now. And it's something that I need to make sure that I interrogate my actual raw frames a little bit better. Because looking at any of these frames here, let me pull up. Oh, sorry, those were the ones from last year. I won't pull them up right now, but when I looked at the raw frames, that kind of flaring was in there. It was just very subtle. But now that I know what to look for, I can take my test shot and see, am I getting that flaring? And if I am, boom, I'm immediately going to reframe a little bit in order to try to not have it in there. So that's one thing. Another thing on here, and it is going to be subtle, but I can tell that my stars aren't as round as I normally get them at home. I can see some elongation going on in here. And the real reason for that, in my opinion, is that my guiding just wasn't good enough for 5 minute long exposures. I mean, it was good. Don't get me wrong. This picture's great. But in terms of getting the stars at the same level of roundness that I get when I'm doing 2 minute exposures, it wasn't quite as good in here. And that could be due to my polar alignment or a little bit of things being off in my guiding, stuff like that. So maybe instead of doing 5 minute exposures, I do a little bit less. Another part of that, and it's very hard to tell in this final image, but I've actually got a satellite streak coming right through here. And when I look at the luminance on this, it's very hard to tell in here. It might actually be in one of the color frames that I was really seeing that trail. But I've got a little trailing here. I had to do some because I was getting some trailing over here as well, and I was able to kind of tweak integration settings to get rid of that. Once again, real subtle. No one else is going to notice that, but I will. And when I'm comparing myself to this image next year, I don't want that trail in there. And the easiest way to not get that trail in there is take some more exposures. So between that and the stars, next year I'm probably going to say I probably don't want to do a full 5 minutes. Maybe I only want to do 3 minutes so that I can get a little bit rounder stars. But 2, that'll let me get more frames, and that will help out with any satellite trailing that's coming through, because the more frames you have, the more that stuff averages out. Combining that with my colors on here, I got good color. I'm not going to say I got bad color on here, but I wanted more color. I wanted this blue to kind of explode out a little bit more, and this is about as far as I could take it here. So once again, one of the big solutions there is more color frames. Like I said, I only got about 10 per color channel. So if I can spend more total exposure time on the color channels as well, then I should be able to get more color out of this. As a matter of fact, I might also add a narrowband filter into the mix, like a hydrogen alpha. Since there is so much hydrogen in here, this is a little part of Barnard's loop that comes in this framing. I can add that in there too. So, once again, not saying you should do all this different stuff on your image, but I'm saying when I compare this image against this one from last year, what do I still see that I could improve upon? So when I do come out here next year, I can make a laundry list of remember this, remember that, and try to shoot for better than what you had before. So that's really it for this one. I just thought it was important to kind of show kind of what I'm seeing, not just to kind of pat myself on the back for doing a good job on this photo, but to show how if you're working in this hobby, if you're pushing yourself each time, you're going to be improving, right? And so go back to those targets. Go back and if you've shot Andromeda 2 or 3 times, but you feel like you've really learned something since the last time, that you've got a better plan for it, or maybe you're just willing to commit more time on it on the acquisition side, go back and do it again. You might be surprised at how good you've gotten, even with the same equipment. So that's it for this time. I hope that was enjoyable for everyone. Feel free to leave a comment or subscribe, and I will see you guys next time. Until then, I wish everybody clear skies. Thanks.